Don't mind. Is
So
it online?
right now, we have Commissioner Goldthorpe.
Oh, okay.
And we have Chief of Staff Paul Bagel, who's serving.
Okay.
But we don't have any members right now. We have
Oh, that's
5 of 9, so we
We have-
do have a quorum.
that's what I was counting.
Mr. Brown. He-
Someone just came in. I can't tell.
Oh,
No. No.
I'm not,
Somebody else.
and I don't have any email. Again, Eric from Ada County did say that he was unable to make it, but we're missing Cuna, Eric Barnsdale.
Well, it's 2:01, so
Yeah.
let's get started. Thanks, everyone, for being here. And I appreciate the air conditioning. Just for the folks online, I'm Tricia Nilsson, representing the city of Boise, and then why don't we go around?
Mike Wardle, Brighton Corporation.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Mark Heisinger with Kittleson and Associates.
Sonia Delighten with Kittleson and Associates.
Walter Steed, City of Meridian.
John Turnipseed, City of Star. Peter Oliver with TOK Commercial.
Okay, and I see Ed and Sen. Do you guys want to just, maybe for when people watch the video later? Okay. Yes, okay. Well, thanks for being here. And I just want to thank Stacy. You know, as a newer member, I kept thinking, I'm trying to catch up with what the committee's history and what you've all done. And being quite familiar with the open meeting law for the last almost 30 years, is that we are required to have minutes. We are a creature of state law. And so I wanted to talk to my commissioner and talk to the director. And yeah, so we're going to have minutes as a committee from our meetings, and you will see them like most every other committee, I think, that you've ever sat on. And so so we do have minutes. And I want to thank you, Stacy, for doing that. Let's start with the November 13th, 23. We've got several of you attended that meeting. Is there, a second to review it?
I read them previously, Madam Chair, and would move for approval of the November 13th, 2023 minutes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. I have to get you guys straight. So you're John. John from Star. See, the other benefit of minutes is that you constantly get reinforced with everybody's name. I already know Peter. Okay, it's been moved by Mike Wardle, seconded by John Turnipseed, that we accept the minutes of the November 13th meeting. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Now we'll move to the minutes of the, let me get to the right, April 22nd meeting of the CICAC. Is there a motion to accept the minutes of that meeting?
So moved.
Okay, Peter.
And second.
Okay, it's been moved by Peter Oliver, second by Mike Wardle, that we accept the minutes of the April 22nd meeting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. There, get that out of the way. So thank you for doing that. Seems like a little thing, but it's, you'll appreciate them in about 2 years from now. So with that, I will, I guess, Edinson, did you want to kick this party off? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So thank you for having us again today's CIC meeting. We're here. So back in May, we presented to the commission on this effort that it's an ongoing effort on the review of the preliminary analysis for the impact fee and CAP update, which we are aiming for 2025. This is today's presentation will focus in service areas. This is an ongoing topic that the commission requested staff to review more in detail, look at different to look at different scenarios, but at the same time, kind of explore more of what the best practices are regarding service areas and how they're defined. So this is the task that myself, Elis Bautista, had a co-manager, and Megan Anderson, who's sitting on the stand today, as co-manager. We are working in coordination with Kittleson, Sonia, Mark. Thank you for all the work you guys do. In this review of the service area, this presentation is a two-part series of, is the first of a two-part series. And here we're gonna go over what is defining sort of what is a service area, defining parameters behind it, what are the focus that we're taking, reviewing the service areas and defining what scenarios to look at. But and that's something that Sonia and Mark will dive in here in a minute. We're expecting to come back again in the future after we have presented to commission with the results of the analysis. So the CICAC will be involved on the review of that of the data that we come up with. So with this, I will kick it up to Sonia and Mark and for today's presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Edison. So what we'll be walking through today is very similar to the work session that we presented at and got feedback from the commission back in May, the end of May. But we wanted an opportunity to do it with this committee as well, so that each of you had a chance to ask questions, make sure we all understand the data, and also provide your input and thoughts so that the commission can take that under consideration as well. So just as a reminder, we've been working with this group as well as the commission since last summer on evaluating best practices as it relates to the development of capital improvement plans and traffic impact fees. When we presented to the commission back in December, as Edison said, there was this desire to do a more refined deep dive into certain topics, with service area being one of them. And so that's sort of where we are today in the late spring, summer of 2024. And we wanted to report back on what we found so far related to this concept of service area. As a reminder overall, what is ACHD CIP and what are traffic impact fees? So traffic impact fees are a tool that ACHD has that allows developers to pay their proportional fair share of more system-wide improvements. Those of you who are very familiar with the development process know that developers often conduct a traffic impact study for proposed new developments that really isolates project-specific improvements that are needed to accommodate that development within the development area. But traffic commonly doesn't just stay within that area, it often goes throughout the system. And so traffic impact fees are a tool that allows development to pay their fair share of system-wide improvements without having to study the whole county every time a new development is proposed. In order for ACHD to have impact fees, they are required to also have a corresponding capital improvement plan that lists out what are those system-wide improvements that are going to be needed and triggered from growth and development over a horizon year, which is usually about a 20-year horizon year. For context, impact fees make up about 18% of ACHD's total revenue, about $24 million a year on average over the past 5 years. But the capital improvement plan, as you can see at the bottom here, is just one of several plans that the district has that help guide and direct what goes into their integrated 5-year work plan, which is what specifically the district will build and construct over the next 5 years. So it's an informative document, but it's also balanced with a number of other plans like their ADA plans, their bike plans, and other plans that are needed to inform that process. All right. As a reminder, again, we actually looked at 4 key topic areas that this group, as well as the commission, confirmed were of particular interest to study as part of this update. Service area was one of those, but we also went through a best practice review for the other three. We reported that back to you at that November 13th meeting. So thank you for having the minutes to remind me what date it was. That's great. As part of this effort, we did want to dive into service area in more detail. That was the request of the commission. So when we talk about service area, it's really important to understand what are the legal requirements in the Idaho Development Impact Fee Act that speak to service area and inform what requirements we need to meet as it relates to service area. So on the screen here are the key bullets that we pulled out of the Development Impact Fee Act that speak to service area. So the act defines service area as a geographic boundary where the public facilities within that boundary, and in this case, we're talking primarily about those transportation facilities, where the transportation facilities in that boundary serve the growth within that boundary. So they define service area as a sub-region where the growth and the projects are tied. They don't want a service area to have growth that then drives projects in other locations. The service area boundaries need to be determined based on sound engineering and planning principles. And we'll get into our evaluation of that here. Any impact fees in a service area need to stay and fund projects within that area. So you are not able to collect impact fees in one area and apply that to projects within a different service area. And that impact fees must be spent within 8 years or refunded. So that's another key consideration when we're talking about project flexibility and implementation. We don't necessarily want to constrain ourselves into a scenario where we're not able to use those impact fees within that time period. Some historical context, and I believe we presented a little bit about this before when Jeff Wordle was here with us. He was really helpful in informing some of the historical context that ACHD has gone through as it relates to service area. When ACHD started to implement this idea back in the early 90s, they started with a single service area concept, but one that had identified specific benefit zones within that service area. And the benefit zones did function somewhat similar to service areas where the fees within those benefit areas were retained within those benefit areas to fund projects. In 2022, there were some changes implemented into the Idaho Development Impact Fee Act. And so ACHD went through an update in 2023 to address those changes. At that time, multiple service area scenario was implemented within the CIP and traffic impact fees. And 4 service areas were developed at that time that really balanced the cost of projects across the service areas, so that major CIP projects weren't disproportionately impacting one service area versus the other. The aim at that point was to sort of balance fees across the different areas. And then in 2012, another impact fee update went into place. And at that time, the district had identified several large-scale projects that really were of regional benefit in nature. They served travel across the county. And so at that point, they went back to a single service area so that those regional projects could be funded by growth throughout the county. And that those projects could also be funded in a manner that wasn't constrained to one subregion of the county. And so since 2013, that's been the service area model that ACHD has had. And of course, we're going through a process of evaluating whether or not that's still the right model to function in. I did want to remind this group as well, regardless of which service area model we move forward with, ACHD's current impact fee policy does provide some latitude and flexibility within it. They do provide credits for redevelopment. So if a developer comes to a property that's already developed and changes the use or enhances the use, they get credits for any redevelopment that takes place. So they're only paying sort of the net differential in impact fees on that redevelopment. They also work with developers to provide refinements to their impact fees based on land use context. As an example, I know Kittleson has worked with several of the developers of some of the downtown Boise housing that's going up to get credits for impact fees, understanding the land use context in downtown Boise, where more of those trips would likely be walking, biking, or transit trips. And then there is an individual assessment process, which is a process sort of after the fact where development can pay their impact fees, but then once they're built, can go back and do a study to document if their fees should be different based on unique trip generation or mode choice conditions. So there's quite a bit of flexibility and latitude, and I know probably several people in this room have worked with ACHD to take a closer look at their impact fees where appropriate. So based on that, we went about creating some scenarios to evaluate different service area scenarios to evaluate which one would be the most appropriate to move forward with at this time. As we know, any scenario that we developed has to be consistent with the requirements in the Development Impact Fee Act. And the key element of that act that drives the scenario development is the fact that any service area scenario needs to be based on sound planning and engineering principles. And so in order to evaluate that, we really identified 3 sources of data that help guide and direct how travel patterns occur in the county. And we evaluated those with the overarching view of how would these inform different service area scenarios. So the first one was trip length, which is how far on average do trips go within Ada County? And are there differences across the county in terms of how far trips travel? Do trips in one part of the county travel a different length compared to those in other areas? Mode share was the second piece of data that we looked at. So how do trips occur within Ada County, and are there differences with how those trips occur across the county, whether there are certain areas that have more driving trips compared to transit trips or walking trips and vice versa? And then the third piece that we looked at, the third data source that we looked at was trip capture. And trip capture documents whether trips originating in certain portions of the county stay within those areas of the county, or do trips originating in certain portions of the county go to different areas of the county? And again, this data piece is really trying to get at that requirement in the Impact Fee Act as to, are there sub-regions within Ada County that function as their own transportation systems, where growth in that area really drives projects only in that area? So maybe I'll pause here because I want this to be a dialogue. Are there any thoughts or questions at this point so far?
I'm curious, Sonia, on how did you, I know as you get through the information of the data a little bit further, you get into specifically how, but how do you determine that mode share? Is that by?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the data source we used for all of this analysis is called Replica. And Replica is a product on the market. There's many different big data sources, but they're a big data source where they compile travel characteristics and information, basically from anyone who's walking around or driving around with a cell phone, with GPS in their vehicle, with some other connected technology. And Replica buys all that information from these cell phone providers or GPS providers and compiles it all. So, you know, your question about how does Replica know if someone is driving versus walking? That's a little bit part of Replica's black box, but they do look at how fast is the trip occurring and on what path is the trip occurring. So if, you know, a trip's occurring at 10 miles per hour or 20 miles per hour or more, they probably know that person isn't walking. That person is either in a bike or a vehicle. Depending on the straightness of the path, does it follow roadways or does it like meander through areas? That also informs what type of mode the Replica assigns that trip to.
Well, Madam Chair, that would explain why a few years ago when we changed a location of a standing meeting that occurred twice a month. After we changed that location, the next time I got in my car, my phone actually told me that it's only 19 minutes to that new location, and I never put it in my. That's fascinating and scary,
Yeah.
actually.
They know. Yeah.
The advantage is
Now-
you get better data than a travel diary. of
Okay,
People
well,
writing
yeah.
That is
their
true. That
I
is
was
true.
curious.
trips down,
Yeah.
so.
Amazing, thank you.
And,
Yeah.
and Sonia and Mark, can you just confirm, when we talk, we're speaking of trips, we're talking about all trips throughout the entire county, not just on arterials or anything. It's the whole volume of trips.
That is correct. So the, and Mark can chime in here too. We did screen out only weekday trips. So we didn't include weekend type trips. But I think that's the only screening or midday weekday.
And that
trips,
wasn't
I think.
really a screening, like when
Yeah.
you look at this data, you can either choose like a weekday or a weekend. And this is a spring 2023 average Thursday, essentially is what this represents. Which is the most recent that was available when we started this. And then we screened out trips that were 30 plus miles,
Right.
essentially to take out like those kind of like long haul trips, because they were, you know, messing with some of those averages, just when you're looking at stuff like that.
So the
But it
longest was
includes
30.
all trips, work trips,
Yeah.
education trips,
Right.
recreation trips.
Yeah.
And it doesn't restrict trips to just the arterial system.
Yeah.
It's for everybody's trip. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
If I might, last time there was something about excluding interstate and state highway use. Are they excluded or are they included?
Great question. So for this analysis, we haven't excluded any trips yet. Of course, once.
Trip length you did.
No. Now, I'll complete the answer. So once we get down to the activity of creating the actual impact fees, at that point, we will need to take out any distance that's not on an ACHD roadway as part of that trip. So at that point, it gets screened out. For this exercise of creating potential service area scenarios, we did not screen out those trips yet. I think there was one more
Oh,
question.
sorry, Peter.
What about when you've got bikes getting on buses and people getting on buses? How does it figure all, you know, I'm just thinking about downtown in particular.
Right. I think, so if you ask me, I would say I probably need a Replica rep to answer that, but Mark, maybe you have a better question, better answer to that.
Yeah, I think it calculates them all as separate trips. So if someone bikes to a bus stop, gets on the bus, takes the bus somewhere, those are going to be separate trips.
Mhm.
Yeah. Good question.
Yeah. All right, so let's get into showing you what this data tells us about travel characteristics within Ada County. So this map shows average trip length, and we broke it down by census tract area. And essentially, the lightest areas on this map represent the shortest trips. Shortest average trip, which is about 4 miles on average. Those areas had the shortest trips. And then as you get darker, the average trips within those census tracts starts to get longer and longer, with the darkest areas, which you can see probably on the south end of the county and at the very north end of the county. Those census tracts had the longest average trips at about 11 miles on average. And so as we were looking for sort of trends in this data, what we found is that there is this area, and I'm not sure, can I use a pointer here? Once I go to the screen, it goes away. Yeah, sorry, that's all right. So there is this area sort of surrounding downtown Boise. You can look at the north end, you see the close east end, and then south of downtown as you look into the sort of southeast neighborhood area, including the area around Boise State. Those areas are definitely showing up as the lightest on this map, meaning those areas definitely have the shortest average trips overall. You can see downtown itself, which is sort of that slightly darker area in the middle of that outset there, has longer trips than the areas around it. It's probably not surprising. People drive into downtown from further away to go to work, probably visit businesses in downtown, probably go to the St. Luke's Medical Complex and things like that. And you can also see that mirrored actually if you go to the other graphic and you look right about where St. Alphonsus Medical Campus is. It's sort of right south of where the I-84 icon is. Yeah, thank you so much, Stacy. Oh, thank you. Yes.
Is that also the mall area, or I can't really?
The mall,
South of the mall.
yeah, it's a
South,
little south
yeah,
of the
okay,
mall.
Thanks.
But you can see there's some of these, you can even look at sort of downtown Meridian there. That's another attractor, it looks like, where you've got slightly longer trips coming there. So that in general makes sense. You can see where some of these more regional attractors are. But definitely those areas surrounding downtown Boise stood out as the shortest on average. And then not surprising, those areas on the outskirts of the county had the longest trips, likely needing to travel further for jobs and education and shopping, all of it, those kind of uses.
Sonia?
And feel free to ask questions as we go.
Yeah, I
yes.
don't have a legend, so I'm. Star like dark brown is the dark red. I can't differentiate some of the darker
Yeah, so if
tones
you
to-
look at the sort of the south, the northwest corner of the
Yeah.
county up there. The very northwest corner would be the darkest at about 11 miles on average. But then as you get into Star itself, it's slightly less. From the colors, I would say it's probably around 8 to 9 miles on average. Yeah, as you look at Star, and then Eagle's a little less than that.
Just had one of those questions.
Yes,
Trips originating in Canyon County,
yes.
do they count once they cross into Ada, or does it have to originate from Ada?
Great question. So these are trips originating in these census tracts. So it's only including trips originating within Ada County. Great question. Okay. So then next is,
Originating and ending.
yes,
I think we included all trips. So I believe the only filter we put on it was
thanks for clarifying.
if it was 30+ miles. So we took out kind of those extremes. And then we
Yes.
so just in terms of what this
So-
data is representing,
If there was a trip ending in Ada County, it would be included here. Or if it was starting in Ada County and
Yeah.
then went to Canyon County, it would be included.
look
in
at it,
there, yeah.
as trips originating or trips destined to Ada County,
Yeah.
it'll kind of work out the same either
Yeah.
way.
Yeah,
But yeah, this was originating and it could have gone to Canyon County. The only filter we have
Yes.
on here is that overall trip length. So trips like Twin Falls would not be included.
Okay, if I might follow up on that, and I
Yes.
don't getting too far down in the weeds.
You're okay.
If you're starting trips 30 miles out and coming in, that's really gonna skew it. Are you just counting the distance once it enters Ada County, even though it started 30 miles out?
So we didn't include trips that long.
Yeah,
But say, for example, there was a trip that started in downtown Napa or in Napa and it went to downtown Meridian, it would be included. It would show up as a trip to that census tract in Meridian
With the full mileage.
with the full mileage,
correct.
as long as it was less than 30 miles. Yes. Good clarifications. That's good. Okay, so next we have mode share. So on this map, the lightest areas on this map show the locations that had the lowest percent of car travel. So, and then the darker areas have had the highest percent of car travel. So again, you can see some areas just north of downtown and south of downtown, particularly around the Boise State campus area. Those were the areas that showed up as having the lowest amount of car travel at about only 78% of car travel. And then the darkest areas, which you can see some in Southwest Boise, in Meridian, up in Eagle, those were the areas that had the highest percent of vehicle travel, up at about 90% of trips occurred by personal vehicle. These percentages are as a percent of all trips coming to or from those census tracts. So I know a question we had at the commission was, you've got this very light area down in the southern portion of Ada County. Why is everybody walking and biking there? And that may be an issue, or that may be showing up that way because there's just not a lot of trips coming from that census tract in the first place. So even if there were some trips by another mode besides vehicle, it's showing up as a little lighter.
Sonia, this is one where it would benefit the interpretation of this metric to understand by census tract the volume of trips. Just for that, percentage kind of evens everybody out, but the volume might be wildly different tract to tract. And so that's why I can't really just depend on this map without having that foundation of the volume of trips that I'm talking about is the, 78% in one area. What is that volume compared to another tract?
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yep, that's a great point.
Chair, that makes
Yeah.
absolutely sense. You can see in the map, that area south of the county
Mhm.
shown has
Yeah,
and that totally makes sense because this area south of the county, the reason it's showing lighter colors, even though you would expect longer commutes, or the focus would be vehicles in that area based on the land use and attractions there, it's showing lighter there, and that's the reason behind it. Because
Yeah,
it doesn't average based on the volume, total volume trips that we do. So
Yeah.
absolutely, we'll take it.
Yeah.
That's a great
I mean,
point.
I
Yeah.
know you have the data, it's just how you want to show it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great point. I think, an interesting thing that came from this is no matter where you are in Ada County, at least 75% of the trips are occurring by vehicle. There are some that are on that lower end, but then some obviously that are quite a bit higher than that. So that's kind of interesting. The other interesting pattern you can sort of see here, if you look broadly at this figure, is that the eastern portion of the county definitely looks lighter overall as you compare to the western portion of the county. And so we did take a look at that. And sort of, if you use Cole Road as a dividing line, just because there's some dark census tracts that go up to Cole Road there, it's about in the low 80%, sort of around 82% of the trips in the eastern portion of the county occurring by vehicles, compared to sort of about 87% in the western portion of the county overall. So you can kind of see that pattern as you look at this map as well.
Yeah, one other observation, and it always depends on your perspective, but I think when I look, we've always had in the regional plan, kind of a goal for mode share, is to get maybe 25% of the trips. You know, seems like we've always been at 10, so I'm looking at 78 going, that's awesome. You know, or usually like at least to 78 or cars, I'm like, well, only 78.
Yeah, I mean, there's
Some areas.
Yes, that are
Yeah.
reaching that goal right now.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
And that, you know, a question from the commission came up as, you know, sort of what are those areas telling us that maybe we could do in other locations of the county to improve that mode share in other locations as well. Good. So then finally, internal capture. So, you know, as a reminder, the data that we evaluate related to internal capture informs us if there are ways to portion out the county into sort of independently functioning regions, sub-regions within the county. Are there areas where the growth in that area is going to drive projects kind of contained within that area versus driving the need for projects elsewhere? And so we started at the very high level. You can see here in the upper left at the county-wide, what does that look like for Ada County as a whole? And what we found is that 91% of the trips either originating or destined within Ada County actually come from Ada County as well. So that was an informative base point for us to look at. Then we portioned out the county into sort of an east side and a west side of the county. What does that look like? And our dividing line here is somewhat arbitrary, but it's around Cole Road. We kind of use that mode share as a guide to separate things out. And if you do that, in the eastern portion, shown up there, this isn't going to work, but shown up in the top right in the blue, about 65% of the trips originating in that area stay within that area. And then in the purple, the western portion of the county, about 74% of the trips in that area stay within that area. If you look at the county in two regions, but this time dividing it north and south along the interstate, if you look north of the interstate, 80% of the trips originating there north of the interstate there stay within that area north of the interstate. But when you look south of the interstate, only 52% of the trips generating from in that southern blue area stay within that area. And finally, if we broke it down into 4 regions, sort of northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest, you can see the numbers here. The northwest region would be the highest, capturing the trips within that sub-region at about 64%. But then the other regions go down further from there. And, you know, to meet the requirements in the Impact Fee Act, what we're looking for in these scenarios is balance. We're looking at any scenarios that balance internal trips in whatever sub-regions we create. So we're looking for the scenario that has high internalization in every region that we're creating. So, you know, as we look at this, we've got really good internalization if we look county-wide. If we split the county into 2 sub-regions, east and west, we still have a pretty high percentage of internalization in both those regions. But then when we broke it down either north-south or into 4 regions, we really start to lose, at least in some of the regions, a high internal percentage.
Again, we don't know the volumes.
Again, we don't know the volumes, or we haven't presented the
Yeah.
volumes here, no. And I'm not sure for this one if that really matters, the volumes in this one because, again, if we were to move forward with a service area scenario that broke the county down into multiple subregions or multiple service areas, we wouldn't have engineering and planning data to support either of the bottom two scenarios. That planning data just doesn't support it, because if we were to play this out and pretend these are the service areas, you know, you would have projects, say in the north-south two region scenario. You would have development occurring within the southern region that was only paying traffic impact fees within the southern region, yet its traffic is, you know, 48% of its traffic is going to the northern region, and it wouldn't be paying for projects in there. So that's why we're really looking for balance.
I just struggle with, I mean, there's the lines, we're looking at comparable size of areas. But are we then not showing the volume differences around the county? Volume of trips, you
Yeah.
know? That's the,
I think like one of the reasons why we didn't look at volume was because we were trying to
Yeah.
find geographic areas with distinct differences.
yeah,
So we were focused a little bit more on like the actual geographic areas and
right.
seeing if there's distinct differences in the travel patterns. Like, I think that's partially why we framed it kind of in this way.
Yeah,
If that's helpful, I mean, we can pull that data and show, you know, send that out as well. There's nothing stopping us from doing that. I just don't know if the volumes on this particular, for this particular topic,
Mhm.
really inform anything that these percentages don't. And we're trying to get at this idea of, you know, where is development occurring and where are the projects going to be that development drives the need for?
Madam Chair,
Okay.
one of the things that we have to look at from the perspective of the trip capture is that how well each of the boundaries work by itself as an independent service areas in its own way. So comparing them, certainly we can compare them and do a data analysis of those sorts based on the traffic volumes. But the goal through looking at it from the trip capture is making sure that the boundaries that we have developed can work by themselves. It can be independent of each other. The percentage that you see here just demonstrate from itself how high that internal trips are working. So for example, in the countywide, basically that's the highest we can get at this point. And then breaking it apart even more, that's where you would have areas higher volume, higher internal capture than other areas. And our goal is to, and there's no science behind or best practice of which is that percentage you want to hit. Overall, we want to keep them as independent as we can, percentage wise, greater than, and we cannot say percentage, but we can say like, we think like, for example, the two region, it's a good goal to have above 60, just to reflect that internal independence of each other.
Great, thanks, Edison.
It just shows our really lack of north-south routes right now.
All right, so we took all this data and to develop scenarios, service area scenarios for evaluation, we really, as Edison said, we really need to look at all three pieces of information. We can't base it just on internal capture or just on mode share. We really need to overlay the trip length, the mode share, and that internal capture data to craft scenarios that are sort of defensible and supported by those engineering and planning principles. So that's what we did. And we felt there were three possible scenarios that are supported enough by the data that we recommended to move forward for further evaluation. So, and I'll go into each of these in more detail, but the three scenarios were keeping a single service area for the entire county, but then adding an overlay zone to that, and I'll go into detail by what I actually mean by that. Scenario 2 would be looking at an option that has 2 separate service areas within the county. And then scenario 3 would be maintaining the current conditions, what ACHD has today, with just a single service area for the entire county. So I'll go into a little bit more detail about what actually each of these scenarios would look like. So the first is a single service area, but with an overlay zone. And so in this scenario, there would be one service area for the whole county. So a single set of projects that every development in the county would pay into. However, within the overlay zone, and you could see that overlay zone defined in orange there, which sort of encompasses downtown Boise, the north end, the east end outside of downtown Boise, and then goes south into the Southeast Neighborhood Association, as well as captures the Boise State University campus. Within that overlay zone, the impact fees in that area for development would be reduced because the data showed that development within that area has a fewer number of vehicle trips, and also the vehicle trips it does have are shorter trips. So that's what this scenario would be. I'll pause for questions on that. Or if that makes sense, I can move on.
Well, I had thoughts again.
Yeah,
after
thoughts
the
are
work
great.
as to having. And I don't know, I help me complete the thought if you
Yes.
would, because I'm trying to, I don't know if it's analogous to like a park impact fee where, and I know most of the cities have those, where it's kind of divided into regional parks. Everybody goes to regional parks, so part of your fee is for the regional park, community and neighborhood. So the total sum is, and I kind of see this as where everybody pays, and this isn't totally accurate, but like an arterial fee. And then some areas, the nature of their local traffic is different, that they would pay it something different for that overlay because its travel characteristics are more localized, or impacts are more localized. Does that make sense? I don't know.
It's an interesting analogy. And I think there are some analogies that can be drawn there. So, but it is slightly different because if you look at what is the equation that makes up a city's park fee, like you said, it's going to have maybe a regional park component, it's going to have a neighborhood park component, and maybe it has something else. When you look at traffic impact fees, the equation that goes into impact fees has number of trips, maybe I'll clarify, number of vehicle trips.
Yeah.
It's got trip length, so how long are those trips? And then it's got a few other factors such as how much is on Ada County roads versus ITD roads. So what we're doing is saying there's 2 components of that equation that data shows within this area, their components of that equation are much lower than elsewhere in the county. And in fact, if you add the number of vehicle trips and the trip length together, it's sort of a 26% reduction that you get compared to what we found from the travel data elsewhere in the county.
Can you go back a slide? I just want to,
Absolutely.
I was going to ask, is there like a scenario 2A that would have service areas and maybe one or some of them would have an overlay within that service area? Or do the data just doesn't support that?
You could do that, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you
I'm
could-
just trying to.
You could do the 2 service area model, and in the I guess, the east service area, which includes downtown Boise. You could add
Or the.
An
did the
overlay
north
zone.
South, the north include downtown? I couldn't quite,
the north does include downtown.
the
Yeah.
north south one, that,
It
yeah,
goes
the
north of Lady.
85th, yeah, yeah,
It
okay, so
would
it did
include
too.
downtown.
Yeah,
So
we're
yeah,
talking about-
there's-
yeah.
I guess there's nothing preventing you from doing that. It just, the more you do, the more complexity you introduce, but they could be
Oh.
combined. They absolutely could be
Okay.
combined if that was
Yeah, I just didn't know
it-
what,
desired,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. Any other questions from the committee on this concept of an overlay zone? No, all right. So moving on. So the next scenario would be a 2 service area scenario. Excuse me. My voice is gonna start to give out here. And in this scenario, there would be 2 distinct service areas within the county. They each would have their own set of projects, different projects. Only development within the given service area. So, within the west service area, only development within the west would pay into those west projects, and same for the east. But the reason we felt this was a feasible scenario to carry forward for evaluation is because it was supported by that internal capture data, where this was really the only breakdown within the county, besides including the county as a whole, that had balance in that internal capture between the 2 sub-regions. Thank you so much, Stacy. And then in addition to that, when we went back all the way to that trip length data, you might remember, there was definite differences between the east portion of the county and then the west portion of the county in terms of how long the average trip length was. And maybe I'll just flash back there quickly so you can see it. So you might remember, there's trip length, and then there was also mode share. Sorry, that's what I meant to say. In mode share, there's definitely a difference where you could see the eastern portion of the county showed up lighter on this map, meaning it had a lower percentage of vehicle mode share versus the western portion of the county. So that would be this scenario for evaluation. Yes.
And I'm not suggesting doing it. Why not a north-south?
Great question.
Yeah, because I was thinking the same thing, as remind me why we should balance trip capture.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Same thing, yeah.
yep.
Yeah.
So let's go back to these. So,
Because north and south, if you look at number 2, are different, which
They're
to me
different.
kind of leans toward a north-south break for 2 service areas.
yes, so, and maybe we shouldn't be looking at areas that are different within the county. We want to look at areas that are consistent within the county. That's really what we want to be looking for.
Takes me around to why split it.
That's a great question. That is absolutely a great question. So maybe I'll reiterate this again. Hopefully this helps. So if we were to split it, and this is again, just looking at internal capture data, which is just one, but if we were to split it north-south and have that purple and blue be the service areas, north and south, what you would do is establish what transportation projects are needed in that north region and what transportation projects are needed in that south region. But when you do that, only the development in the north region would pay for projects in the north region. And only development in the south region would pay for projects in the south region. And when you look at that from, is development paying for its proportional fair share? What these numbers tell me is there is almost 48%, almost half of the trips within that south region drive to and from the north region. And so they are driving the need for projects in that region as well, because that's where they're going to and from every day. But they wouldn't be paying for those regional projects because they'd only be paying for localized projects in the south.
And the converse to
Yep.
that, which is, again, people see the same thing two different ways, is that the north, even though 20% go outside, if it was a single district, they're paying 100%. I mean, they're paying for everything. Even,
are, yeah.
so that's the other way, the other side of the coin.
So if I'm looking at this
Yeah.
north region, I would love it to be its own service area. That looks great. It's a very high internal percentage. That looks great.
Right.
Except then when you look at the south and it's only 52. If the north was 80 in this scenario and the south was say 70%, then that becomes the much more realistic scenario as opposed to dividing it east-west. But that's just not what the data is showing. The development in that southern portion is going to destinations outside of it all the time. So that's the concern we had.
Okay,
Mhm.
got it. If I may.
Yeah.
Does Micron's $15 billion development pay impact fees?
I'll let Megan answer that question.
Yes, we do calculate impact fees for all the development that's happening at Micron. They did have a credit that they recently used the remainder of the credit, so everything moving forward, we are assessing and they are paying their fair share according to our current impact fee ordinance.
Big bucks.
Yeah, they're big projects, so yes, but they are paying for their development.
Okay.
And that's a good example of a large attractor where if they felt it was in their best interest, they would do a study to see how many trips are on the interstate versus ACHD roads, right? I mean, just to show there's a lot of math.
Yeah.
That Megan and the
Then you
folks have to deal with,
factor in how
yeah.
congested the freeway is gonna get and what the
Yes.
results gonna be pushing
Back
everybody out on
along
the
on that.
arterials. Mike, do you have a formula for that? Or
Yeah.
algorithm yet? I will.
Yeah.
These are
That's what we
all
call the
really
doomsday
good
scenario,
questions.
Peter. Yeah.
Got
when
it.
the Interstate goes
Okay.
belly up.
So, yeah, so again, wanted to highlight the two keys, portions of data that we're driving the support of this as a scenario are that internal capture that we just talked about, but also the mode share where we did see a difference between, probably about an 8% difference on average between the mode share and the eastern portion of the county and then the western portion of the county. And then, so finally, the third scenario that we recommended moving forward for evaluation was, maintaining that single service area. We just talked about an example of you have a large employer that is probably driving trips from, or generating trips from all across the county. This is important to have not only as a baseline comparison when we're comparing these other scenarios, but it is also supported by the data. When you look at that, what is functioning as a system, you can say with confidence that the county as a whole is functioning as a system where 90% of the trips are contained within the county. So this was the third scenario we recommended to move forward for evaluation. And so we presented this to the commission, like I said, at the end of May. They supported moving these three potential scenarios forward for evaluation. We have been evaluating them based on sort of these 4 top bullets here. How well are they supported by this engineering and planning data? What happens in the 3 scenarios in terms of the resultant projects and fees that materialize under each? How may each of these scenarios impact the implementation and timing of actually implementing projects from the capital improvement plan? And then what are the differences in terms of administration cost and complexities to ACHD for each of these scenarios? You know, I'm sure you all are aware that no matter what ACHD does, the local agencies and developers have questions about the fees. Why are my fees this way? Why are different cities' fees a different way potentially? And so how do we evaluate each of these three scenarios based on these? And so I don't have a lot of answers for you on the results of this evaluation yet. That's what we're currently doing. And the goal is to present that evaluation back to the commission in mid-July. But we would love any of your input or questions as we go through this evaluation to make sure that feeds into what we present back to the commission.
So Sonia, one question. Because we're countywide, we think big. But a lot of those other jurisdictions, initial research or cities, you know, they're smaller. And I'm thinking of, obviously I'm representing Boise, just totally out of scale to Meridian, Star, and CUNA. But as those cities downtowns grow, just the fact that they're not their own census tract, does that kind of diluting their special characteristics to a larger census tract? Whereas if they were their own downtown overlay, that you may find data comparable to just a common characteristics to other downtowns, small or big. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It's a great question.
Because I like to see like a small business in CUNA just be treated like anything, you know? Whereas it might just draw from that service area. I mean, it might have a short trip lengths and anyway, but we'd never see it because our minimum analytical unit is census tract. Is that an accurate?
I don't know if our minimum data source is census tract. Maybe Mark, you can.
I don't know the replica, but
Could we pull data more refined than census tract?
yeah, with block group or.
I think we can. I think our only hesitation is just like the certainty of the data
Sure.
isn't as good.
Sure.
Just
Yeah,
within
the smaller
this
you get.
platform.
Right.
Okay.
I think
sure.
though, to answer or
Yeah.
to maybe provide some thought on your question, Trisha.
Yeah.
One, what we
Make
do
it-
now doesn't prevent future overlay zones happening in
Thank
the
you. Yeah,
future.
okay.
Those could be created. I think though, as you look at what is the criteria for an overlay zone, one would need to be a clear demonstration that its travel characteristics are unique.
Yeah.
But two, I think you also need to look at, there needs to be some sort of critical mass, right? I don't know if we would recommend one single census tract as an overlay zone.
Right.
There needs to be sort of a critical mass of land use pattern that defines it. And then the final thing I'll add, and maybe Megan, this is what you're chiming in to say, so I apologize, is there is nothing that prevents that small business in downtown CUNA from taking advantage, even if they weren't considered an overlay zone, from taking advantage of some of that other flexibility that's already within the impact fee policy to work with ACHD as they need to, so.
Well, I was thinking more of the smaller towns could do their own individual assessment because the little business isn't gonna be able to do that.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
and that's where we would really have the best opportunity to meet their needs is as every impact fee assessment comes into my team, even without them asking for an individual assessment, we'll catch things like that. And just depending on where it's developed, what kind of a business it is, what's the draw gonna be? Is it gonna be a small, little Main Street kind of a business that no one from Southeast Boise is gonna drive to this business?
I'm not going to Gallagher and CUNA anymore, sadly.
Yeah, so that's really the best way to meet those individual needs, because as we're developing the CIP, we do have to look at it on a larger scale, either countywide or with these different service areas and the overlays that are currently an option for us based on the data that we're seeing. But my team, that is definitely our job to meet with those people individually as they bring questions to us, or even to just catch it and reach out to them and say, this is the category that we have on the sheet, but let's talk more about your business. I'm not sure if that's a good fit. So we do have the flexibility to already meet those needs even with our current impact fee ordinance.
Madam Chair,
Yeah.
down that line, I think you would find, I don't think that it would be supported by census data. But the western side of the county in that east-west scenario, it wouldn't be a downtown, it would be the St. Luke's and Village complex. I mean, that would be about as close as you could get to something that would equate to a downtown Boise in terms of, but I don't know that that would be supported by census data because the population within some of those areas, it's all employment. So it gets
There's no trip cap.
a little messy.
Well, it doesn't get messy. It's just how refined you want to be. You know, that's all. I'm just kind of, because everybody's growing. We're
Yeah.
not really little towns anymore. You know what I mean? And at some point, if there's a way to define the criteria for the overlay. I mean, you mentioned, actually wrote it down, but I don't know exactly what they are, and I don't need to know right
Yeah.
now, but I think that will be important to know why other areas don't qualify.
Yeah.
But they
Or
may in
don't
the
qualify
future.
Yet, but
Yeah,
they may
yeah,
in the future. right?
Exactly.
Madam Chair,
Yeah, sure.
I just follow up to
Mhm.
Mike's statement. I mean, that's those centers, the Village
Mhm.
and these employment centers generate an incredible amount of trips,
Oh, yeah. Just-
right?
Oh.
And that's what we're gonna see more
Yeah.
of, I think, centers scattered. And then the second question I had was, so is there interaction with each city on, where they're seeing their growth and even their zoning? City of
Oh.
Boise just went through rezone, right? That's all gonna impact some of this stuff, but as you are putting together this package, is there interaction with the cities?
So I think that ends and you can chime in,
Yeah,
but
it's-
obviously the
geographic committee.
key data point that we use as we're drafting these projects and then resultant fees is the Compass travel demand model.
Mhm.
And that model, of course, gets updated all the time with input from each individual land use agency within the county. And, is adapted when rezoning happens, when new zoning happens, that sort of thing. So I think that's the sort of foundational document where that gets incorporated.
Madam Chair,
Yeah. and it's-
right now, so right now we're looking at the data as all the trips and we reviewing it because we're trying to provide what the scenario analysis is to the commission and see what path they would like to take us. If we end up in a single service area with the overlay zone, absolutely we'll define those criteria and start looking at a more broader, more detailed scale, like the land use components. Certainly the Compass data takes into account a lot of the land use assumptions that they have on their comprehensive plans, the entitlements that they have approved. So as we start looking and reviewing it more in detail, we'll certainly define those criteria and bring it back for your guys, for the CIC's review as well. So all that information will take into consideration. Or if the
Yeah.
overlay zone is the one that we decide to move forward with.
Yeah, I mean, our perspective is one thing, and there's some of us around the table that are far more educated and informed on the topics, but I'm just talking about as far as the city, the
Yeah.
economic development people and planners, the city of
Yeah.
Boise right now. From my observation, they're not really excited about annexation, right? So that's gonna change a lot of the perspective for the time being. And just wondering how that might influence the areas of that we're talking about splitting up 2 or 4 or
Yeah.
1, et cetera.
It-
Does that
in-
make sense?
If you'll indulge me a few minutes, because I I guess I'm a geek, but I find the demographic information at the traffic zone level to be incredibly important that it be good. And so does Compass, and so do people who manage those models. And that's why every year they reconcile it with the land use decision. So they make sure land use decisions aren't going one way and the model data is different than that. And that gets to particularly households and employment in each traffic zone. I have to think with Micron's expansion plans that that has been plugged in at those traffic zones. And then that gets fed into the model. So those trips get accounted for. And because you have to, I always try to describe to people, it's like a movie. It's like 3D, but you have to put the fourth dimension of time. How is this area growing and how are the growth centers changing around the county? I look at the whole 2-county area. That's why I did ask, and I used to always do it when I had GIS support, is I like to look at the traffic zone level, not to look at the weeds, but to look at that overall spatial pattern of growth throughout Ada County. Where are the job centers? Where are and you can easily show that on a map. So that was my cost to the city for being on this committee. I want to see that map because that tells a better story of kind of what you're getting at is the volume and location of these hotspots over the next 20 years. And anyway, so they humored me and it's obviously more to the west of the county now, but there's still, because of just the density differences in Boise from other folks, it does still account for a significant volume of growth. It's just a smaller footprint than other areas. And that's just because they're just different,
Madam Chair, the fact that we're dealing with a moment in time that will be
Yeah.
reviewed a few years down the line, and this process will take
it's
a look at all of
going-
these
yeah,
changes.
Right.
But it's been really enlightening for me to have now seen this presentation twice, because I think a few meetings ago, we got into this discussion of multiple zones without quite considering the implications of how those dollars can best be used. And if we split it down to a point where we trapped money that can't physically be used for the broader picture, I think that would be a mistake, at least at this point in time. So from my perspective, and I would move that we actually endorse the 3 concepts that have been suggested here today to be evaluated, as has done the commission, so that by the middle of July that we have a better picture of how all of these factors play into it. So I would move that we endorse these 3 scenarios for further study and evaluation.
Okay, is there a second? Then I'll have discussion.
Is this an action item for the agenda? Can we do this?
I don't think we do have
Well,
an action item.
But I think we need to at least express an opinion.
We could provide direction. Let's
Yeah.
do motions, but I think let's just talk about it for
Okay.
now. Okay, is that all right?
Well,
with you?
I for one support the direction.
So I'll ask the other committee members, how do you, what are your thoughts on can you put the slide back up,
Absolutely.
Sonia, that'll help. There you go,
It's not-
perfect.
And I have no problem.
Look at the Johnston,
I guess in general, I'm supportive. I keep
yeah.
looking at the stars perspective. Like Garden City, we just don't have the arterials,
Mhm. See
like,
how-
other places do.
Right,
And we're growing into Canyon County now. So our trips are
Mhm.
outside of our data. I'm trying to figure out how all this is going to impact eventually. Once you get down to the finer points of
Mhm.
developing these plans. I'll support moving forward with these 3 options.
Yeah, I support it, but I still want the criteria for the overlay zones. If there is something in the scenario 2 that might qualify. So I think if we can articulate the criteria for overlay zone, And analysis may show it, there may be an opportunity for one in the scenario two. Does that make sense?
So it may, but of course, the
Yeah.
overlay zone theoretically is suggesting that that's an area that is deserving of paying less impact fees than,
Mhm.
so.
Yeah, I mean, qualifies it. And I get the only other history lesson that was submitted at the beginning, and it just dawned on me, it's there's a lot of work that went into Blueprint for Good Growth, and that was originated by ACHD because of let's just say the capital budget and the operating budget lines are gonna cross. I think we're probably there yet, and it was if we didn't pay attention to how we grew, there would only be funds for operation and maintenance and not system expansion, which is, this is systemic, you know, where are we gonna invest dollars to add more roads? What's the impact? And so then, you know, and that's why that was that interval of time when you had multiple service areas for 10 or so years. And then it was simplified. Now, in listening to the commission discussion at the work session, I don't think because it's simpler, it doesn't sit well with me. That if there's a technical reason to have a difference based on the engineering and planning principles, you need to respect that. You know, I experienced with the little fire districts in Canyon County. We did it because it was the right thing to do. They needed their impact fee. They were all different, but it was a lot of analysis that they paid for and rolled up to an impact fee ordinance for I think 6 of them. And after the first year, we raised over $250,000 for those little fire districts. Now, it would have been, life would have been simpler to just not even do it, but you had to want to do it. I guess you had to want to respect that they had a need, that there was, for those districts, there was a significant financial incentive to them to have it. Other districts didn't really qualify, but you had to want to get complicated because they needed the resources, or they, in this case, the data supports a different impact fee. So, and I think just two service areas versus I think there were 4 in the past. That's still pretty simple, you know,
Remember,
for a county of this population size, and the road networks. Looking at some of the examples in the best practices, now first, one city to have multiple, then that makes my head explode, but I think for a size of Ada County, but I would like to see more information on the overlay zones. I think that would benefit the jurisdictions to understand that criteria, because it is or it isn't, you know, I like things just black and white. Is there any other reflections on this? Yeah, Walter?
Your downtown overlay zone, the one you're used for an example, is because they do so little tripping outside. Is that correct?
No,
This-
It
in the
is
simplest sense. What's
it's
the reason for
too-
picking downtown? overlay?
because more trips happen by walking, biking, transit in that area. And the trips overall are significantly shorter than the rest of the county.
And
Is it skewed by Boise State?
Can I speak? That's my neighborhood. So it's not just downtown, but it's a lot of southeast.
Yeah,
You do have Boise State, but there's a lot of people who live and work in Boise State in that area, but you also have a lot of bus routes that serve that area as well. Number 2, the Harris Ranch. So that as you get closer to Boise State, and I don't know if you want to show the map, Sonia.
yeah.
I can, I can't see a lot of detail, but I can tell that southern boundary has to be Federal Way in the bench. So
It's
you're all
actually
kind of,
Boise Avenue.
is it Boise Ave? The curve,
yeah.
the curve looks too
Yeah.
curvy for, yeah,
Oh,
I
the
can't,
overlay zone?
We
Yeah.
might have followed.
Yeah,
federal
there
for a
it
while.
is.
Oh,
Yeah.
federal,
Is it-
yes, you're right.
Am I
Sorry.
right?
You're
Okay.
right.
Cause it's it's a bench too, but it's all of that, you know, you do have, Broadway, which is a state highway. So that would be excluded, but there is just there's a lot of bikers, there's a lot of walkers, there's bus riders, it's just kind of
I think if
a
you,
mature transportation system, you know.
if
Yeah.
you look at it
Yeah.
from a land use
Yeah.
transportation perspective,
Yeah.
you've got land use patterns in that area that
Yeah.
there's housing, there's jobs, and there's services all
Services, yeah.
within a close enough area where people can either
Mhm.
make those trips by car, but in a very short distance, or they can make the trips by another mode because they're close enough that walking or biking works to make the trip as
But,
well.
but they are an attractor to the fact you got a 6-lane interstate highway funneling into it and out of it. If it
So-
wasn't so many people from the rest of the county going in and out of downtown, you wouldn't need the connector.
So
Downtown
you're bringing
this
up a very good
little
point
portion of
that
it, you know.
we have somewhat glossed over in this presentation. That when you look at like these maps, so if you followed the data perfectly, your overlay zone would kind of be a donut that it excluded downtown itself, because you're right. Downtown, there are people driving to there from a, you know, from a fair distance. There are a lot of vehicle trips.
A lot of.
Yeah,
They may
yeah.
not be traveling within it, but they're
but to it,
flowing
you're
into
absolutely
it and
right.
out of it by the thousands every day.
You're absolutely
Well,
right.
but the out of it are typically going home rather than the trip being generated within that area that then.
But they had to have a reason to go down in the first.
Oh, yeah,
place.
yeah, no, totally correct,
Yeah.
but that trip,
Drive from here at 4
But they're-
o'clock.
but they're
and
not
use the connector and
generated.
Try to get down.
but they're not generated within that area. That's the point, the number of trips generated in that area are not people that are scattering to the hinterland. It's primarily a funnel or a black hole in the
Vehicle
downtown.
trips, yeah.
Oh, anyway.
Yeah, no, you're right. And this gets into that policy decision of what makes up an overlay zone. And it kind of gets to be that you have to have this critical mass of land uses that work together. So your point is extremely valid and the data supports your point, 100%, yeah.
But also that overlay, Walter, isn't just downtown. It's actually a small
It
portion
goes
of it.
beyond, it goes.
goes way beyond
outside
that,
of it,
yeah.
Yeah, they made it larger.
Yeah. And I think with the
Right.
city school, I'm not sure where they're at now, but the traffic zone data would say, I think the goal was 10,000 housing units downtown. So
Yeah,
in other words,
I'm not
there's a lot of housing being built that, I see. I can see it, you know.
Okay.
Lot of projects, so.
One last question.
Oh, yeah, John.
You gave us some data at the previous meeting about the internal versus external trips.
Yes.
Is that going to factor in any way?
So that was by city.
Right.
So say that you went even, I'm gonna go to this graphic here. So that was taking, it was similar to this exercise, except it was going even a step beyond 4 regions and breaking it up to 7 individual cities within the county. And when we looked at the data that way, we saw you're definitely not having that balance that I spoke about before of looking for sub-regions where all of them have a relatively high amount of internal trips. And so this exercise was to sort of break it down somewhere between full county and then all 7 cities. And when we did that exercise, we found that breaking the county out into east, west, 2 areas provides the highest, the best amount of balance.
I was gonna share observation on the 91%. I think that because I know the compass model obviously measures that the screen lines at the county has been, I think, a little higher, but I'm interested in with the growth in Canyon County and the widening of the interstate, if that 95 is now 91, and then we have the Highway 16 extension. But with our own growth too, it's an interesting little balancing act though, but I think it used to be a lot higher than 91 before
Maybe.
those inter-county arterials or
Maybe.
were
Yeah.
expanded, so.
Yeah, the question was raised at the commission meeting. I think the perception for a long time has been that everyone lives in Canyon County and then drives into Ada County for work. And the data just doesn't really support that, because even we looked at the Canyon County data, and if you look at Canyon County as a whole, it has 81% internal trips. So, the vast majority of Canyon County trips are staying in Canyon County as well.
It's all interesting dynamics at
Yes,
work.
it is.
Fun stuff.
Yeah, it is fun.
Well, really appreciate the discussion today. All these thoughts and perspectives are super helpful. And yeah, Ensign, I don't know if you want to
Yeah.
go over next steps.
Yeah, I was
but
gonna,
yeah.
Edison, so looking at there's a commission work session on the 17th of
July
July.
17th.
Okay,
So our next steps is we're gonna do the analysis in the next couple of weeks, leading towards that meeting, where we're gonna present the result of the 3 scenarios. Our plan is to come back to the CICAC the following month to present the same information, as well as we're gonna update a couple of the information that we presented today based on the feedback you received. Including that the mode share map that we wanna see as slightly different. So
which is volumes, yeah.
Yes.
and at that point, we'll continue working through the preliminary analysis to define what those recommendations look like and proceed forward on the update of the impact CIP.
And Walter, depending on when it's scheduled, I'll be gone the first 2 weeks of August, so be prepared to run the meeting maybe. As
know.
vice chair.
If we can adjust that.
Oh, it's fine. Yeah.
September, that's-
I want to thank you for all your work, Sonia and Mark. I just eat it up, but. And thank you, committee, and is there a move to adjourn?
I shall move.
All right,
Thank you.
all right, thank you.
All right.
All in
Thank you,
favor, aye,
everyone.
you're out of here.
Thanks.